And this brings us to the autonomic nervous system, and that's the one that regulates the function of internal organs by stimulating either cardiac and smooth muscles or also glands. This nervous system is involuntary. That means you don't have to think about it. And that's kind of good, because I don't want to have to evaluate, oh, my heart rate needs to be a little bit slower because I'm doing this, or I need to breathe a little deeper because I'm trying to run around. I like the body to just take care of that if we can have it. That would be great. I appreciate that. And so for the most part, that's what happens. And so the autonomic nervous system is here to give us a nice internal environment and keep that inside homeostasis going and keep it stable. We have two main branches, and we talked about it already. So the one branch here is the sympathetic branch, and the other is the parasympathetic branch. And I kind of like this graphic, particularly here. You see, like, the sympathetic branch, the pupils dilate. So when you think of what the sympathetic branch does, you're thinking of what happens when a lion is in the corner and wants to run at me. What do I need to do to be able to either fight the damn thing or run away? The parasympathetic nervous system does the opposite for the most part. So as the sympathetic uses energy, the parasympathetic then tries to regain this energy and build it back up, build the body back up. And so the pupils will restrict. We don't have to worry about them. We try to digest food, we try to get energy, try to have the body make ATP, and try to repair if we have something that's broken. And so when we look at these two very distinct branches of that nervous system, they're like extremes. They're also physically distinct branches. They're not in the same part of the brain and the nervous system. But we want them in equilibrium as much as possible. And if we have them in equilibrium, that's when we, live a balanced life. At least from the nervous system's perspective. So look at the sympathetic nervous system here, what it dominates. It's very interesting. It dominates when there is a feeling of physical and emotional stress. So it's that fight or flight part of the nervous system. And when it is aroused, our skeletal muscles get a lot of blood flow. That means, guess what? The digestive system gets nil, nothing. Our respiratory rate goes up because guess what? We want to have more oxygen in the body to get a lot of energy going so we can run as fast as possible. Again, you think of a lion in the corner wanting to get you. That's when you think of what the body does. And look at over here. It's all sort of described over here. A whole bunch of more stuff that happens. The heart rate increases. The blood pressure goes up. The pupils dilate to get all that information in of what you need to do to run away from that thing. The liver breaks down glycogen and makes glucose out of it. So we have a lot of energy available even if we didn't just eat. And the hair stand up. That's from the animal world because that makes a cat look bigger. So the fight is, the opponent is a little bit more scared about it. So that's kind of cool. So that's the sympathetic nervous system, and what it does, it uses the body's resources up. So it's catabolism. We talked about that a long time ago, in the chemistry chapter, that catabolism versus anabolism. Anabolism, you remember, is anabolic steroids. The word comes from there, so you can always think of that's building up. And so the anabolism, the building up, is the parasympathetic nervous system. So it is dominant when we are relaxed and quiet and meditate, rest and digest. It causes the heart rate to go down, causes the respiration rate to go down. We're preserving the energy, but it causes the peristalsis, the digestive function, to increase. So we can harvest the nutrients out of the food particles and we can build up the body. So that's kind of neat. Looking from a structural perspective, the ANS harbors basically efferent pathways. We talked about that way back in the brain, starting to. So they're all motor pathways. The sympathetic fibers exit the spinal cord in the mid region of the spinal cord. So that's the thoracic region and the lumbar region. And so therefore, that's the physically distinct place where those fibers come off the cord. And they call that type physical part the thoracolumbar outflow. The parasympathetic fibers exit the brain, that's why they're in the cranial nerves, and they also exit the sacral area, and so they call that the craniosacral outflow. And then as these fibers exit the spinal cord, they go first, that last neuron that comes out of here goes into a ganglion. And remember, a ganglion is a cluster of cell bodies in this peripheral nervous system. And so from there then, that nerve has a synapse to the last nerve that then goes to the organ of whatever that is. Here is a gut tube in the muscle layer. So when we have to name those nerves, we're going to call the neuron that comes right out of the spinal cord, we're going to call that the preganglionic neuron. And then the one that's after that peripheral ganglion, call that the postganglionic neuron, which then transmits the impulse to the effector organ. And then I like this chart. You can see that right here. You can see the somatic nerve that we always talked about until now, that nerve going to the muscle. That is just one nerve that comes out of the spinal cord. That's that lower motor neuron that we talked about. And at the end of that nerve, he goes to a skeletal muscle, and the neurotransmitter is even named that it releases. It's right here. It's acetylcholine. And the effect of that neurotransmitter on skeletal muscle is always excitatory. It's always stimulatory. If acetylcholine goes to skeletal muscle, it will always contract. So that's how that works. And then down here we have the autonomic nervous system. First we look at the sympathetic part, and down here is the parasympathetic part. In all of them, though, you can see you have a neuron that goes from the spinal cord to that ganglion, and then a second neuron goes from the ganglion to the effector organ. The sympathetic ones release acetylcholine, that same neurotransmitter, as the skeletal muscle does. As the preganglionic neuron releases acetylcholine, the postganglionic neuron releases norepinephrine. That's adrenaline stuff. And then the interesting thing there is the receptor that norepinephrine goes to is the decider of if it's a stimulatory or an inhibitory reaction effect to what we were trying to do. And that's great, because if you need to send sympathetic nerve energy to blood vessels that go to the muscle, you want them to dilate. You want them to have a lot of blood so they can run around and run away or fight. And if you want the ones that go to the viscera, to the digestive system, you want those blood vessels to decrease in diameter, so not that much blood goes to those areas, but the blood gets shunted away from that to feed the muscles. So that gives you two scenarios of why it's a matter of a receptor that determines if a stimulus is excitatory or inhibitory. And when it says here stimulatory, I don't like that word too much, because a stimulus, it's an excitatory, and the stimulatory, they mean excitatory by that. The sympathetic nerve, though, now has another interesting twist to the whole thing. And some of the preganglionic fibers go to the adrenal medulla, and in there we secrete adrenaline into the bloodstream, and then the adrenaline travels through the bloodstream and it aids the sympathetic effects. So this is like when you feel you going down the freeway and you have a stupid person caught in and you swerve out of the way. That first swerving is the nervous system responding, and then once you gather your kahunas, you get all jittery like you had too much coffee, and that's when you feel when these adrenalines go through the bloodstream and they get to the effector organ, and they make you feel the jitters. But that's where you can feel the difference in speed of an endocrine thing that goes to the bloodstream that takes a little time to have an effect, and the nervous energy that's immediate, that's right there. But it dissipates also really fast. So that's kind of neat. And then last but not least, we got these parasympathetic fibers, and everything here is very similar. We got preganglionics, we got a ganglion, we got postganglionics. And then when you look at the neurotransmitter here, the neurotransmitter onto the effector is acetylcholine. So that's the same as we had the skeletal muscle, but it's the different one than the sympathetic nervous system has. So you don't need to worry about memorizing all that stuff, but I find it interesting information, and I hope you learned something.